unakaanga line moja hivi because ni hapa na hapa. So ukisimama hapo uko short ya kila mtu. So ukisimama unaona tukiweka kwa hii line hapa ndio unaona uitan tunaanza huko na uitan tunakuja huko. Inakuanga hadi simu. Sasa hivi tukikaa hivi tunaona tukikaa sisi wote tukipima because sasa hivi unaona za vile utakiruka. Haya unaona ukipimuka utajipanga ndio wote. Kwa hiyo ukiruka wings kuanza kuja hivi mimi niingie hivi.
Are we all settled now? Imogen? All right, thank you, and karibuni. Omar Hassan, you will open the meeting today for us with a word of prayer.
Okay, thank you very much. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. لم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي ينقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب إلى ربك فرغب. فضل سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you. Now that I mentioned your name, you can introduce yourself.
My name is what the chair said, Hassan Omar, a member of this committee.
My name is Catherine Wambilianga, a member of this committee, County MP Bungoma.
My name is Aaron Cheruyot, member of this committee.
Eugene Omalo, member of this committee. My name is Opio Wandai, member of the committee.
I'm Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, member of the committee and co-chair.
Kimani Shongwa, member of the committee and co-chairing. Welcome. I think I may know all of you, but not everybody may know all of you. You will introduce yourselves, at least the team that is presenting at the front. And if you have anybody who will be backing up, you can introduce them. Let me begin by apologizing. I know we're running about an hour late, and some of you are here before 9. So our apologies. Now, members of this committee, some travel from the villages in the morning. Our other apology is that we were not able to offer you even a cup of tea as you waited, courtesy of the CS National Treasury. We have no tea budget. And only the CS National Treasury can tell you where there is no cup of tea, CS Davis. So Karibuni, maybe you can begin with introductions, beginning with the one who has refused to give us a cup of tea.
Thank you very much and good morning. My name is Chuguna Dungu. I'm the Cabinet Secretary to the National Treasury and Economic Planning. Sorry about the constraints that we are facing, but let me tell you that I know the streets of the city and I live in Kenya, so I know the constraints. But we can talk more about that. At a personal level, I'll provide some tea.
Good morning. My name is Davis Chirchir, Cabinet Secretary, Energy and Petroleum. And I'm here with my PS Alex Washira, PS Energy, PS Liban, where are you Liban? Mohammed Liban, PS Petroleum. I've seen Kipteo Bergoria, the Director General for EPRA, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory. Who else did I see? And a couple of technical staff. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Charles Hinga. I'm the Principal Secretary in the State Department for Housing and Urban Development. I'm here with my technical team from my office, Wahome, who's in the funding workstream. Thank you.
My name is Alex Kamawashira, Principal Secretary, State Department for Energy. Thank you. Rugo.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Abraham Rugo Moreu. I'm the Executive Director of the International Budget Partnership Kenya. And I'm accompanied here by my colleagues, Senior Program Officer John Kenodia and our Research Analyst John Kenodia and Cuba Houghton, who is our Research Analyst. Thank you very much.
I used to be in the same industry you guys were in. I'm now a businessman. In my free time, I look after what the people on this table do, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. You have nobody accompanying you. Thank you for. I also see the Parliamentary Budget Office, Director Masinde behind. I see former Governor Nyeri behind there also, and they are here, some as observers, and someone like Masinde has been a participant from last week. So we welcome you. I don't know who wants to start. I know.
Before they start, let me join Kimani also in welcoming you. So good to see you. I know that you're gonna CS Treasury used to be Central Bank Governor. It's a very generous soul. So I pity you for what you're going through. I worked with you, worked with Davis Chirchir. I was even giving out secrets to Kimani about I know your village. We know you, Bilo, amazing man. Hinga, we waited for you, but you're in South Africa. We really want to hear from you. We know you. And so we're going to engage in a very honest conversation, which Kenyans, as you may know, are truly following. And we hope at the end of your presentation, you'll be able to assist us as a committee not to fall short of Kenyans' expectations on this very critical matter of the cost of living. We decided to single out cost of living out of our retreat in the Mentaita, and we felt we needed a bit more input from the experts themselves. I'm sure you may have heard from some of your colleagues who came before us last week. So, karibuni sana.
Sante, I was asking, I don't know how we proceed. We have a program. The CS National Treasury was listed as the first one, then energy, then housing, Bill Okero and Abraham in that order. But I was proposing, since all these things may end up in the National Treasury, we finish off with the National Treasury probably begin with energy and housing, because they have also requested they're appearing before their respective committees on budget issues. So I was proposing we start with them, if you can agree amongst yourselves who to start. Davis?
Agreed, we can start.
Okay.
How do we start?
We were giving the others about 20 minutes max.
Yes.
You just give, there's a guide on what you are to address, I think, in the letter that was sent to you.
Yeah.
And once you finish, we'll ask you to just sit in there. It would probably be good to just hear Hinga a bit, then Bilo, I'm sure, having been in the petroleum industry, is here to hear from you also, and you would also want to hear his take, and the same with Abraham. Then we can conclude with the CS National Treasury. If we take about 20 minutes each, if you can take less, the better. And if you have a written presentation that you can share with the Secretariat, it would help us also. If you want to project, I'm sure there are those who wanted to project. Projectors are ready also.
Thank you, Chair and Co-Chair and honorable members of this National Dialogue Committee. Thank you for inviting us. Let me confirm, honorable members, that we did receive the invitation dated 24th of October to appear before this National Dialogue Committee, and we have a written presentation which we have submitted. Chair, outside the formal presentation, let me say we're all concerned, particularly the Ministry of Energy, at the cost of living, and energy being a major co-driver of inflation, because it is basically energy is employed in very many facets of our lives, from transportation to powering industry, and so on and so forth. So anything that impacts on the cost of energy impacts on the inflation and the cost of living. And therefore, we are, as you are, looking for ways every day to see how to bring down and make our economy a competitive destination for investors, where cost of living for our people who are employed in industry would be able to make this economy a competitive destination so that we can attract investors. Chair, let me say as opening remarks that the recent happenings, particularly the post-COVID recovery period, where we've seen inflation in economies like the US, Canada, soaring to a high of 9%, is something that is being seen maybe in the last, 22 years, where we see Fed raising interest from a low of 1.5% to a 5.4% today, and then therefore causing the challenge of dollar unavailability in that tightening of monetary policy, and us seeing particularly in the petroleum sector unavailability of dollars because investors find it better to have their dollars sitting in investments, cash deposits, as opposed to allowing them to trade. But that is basically a post-COVID recovery of the inflation, where the U.S. has decided to basically mop up the dollars they had issued during COVID to sustain their economies. And so that challenge is there. It's a global challenge. Those of us who trade in tea are unable to sell our tea in the international market because of unavailability of dollars in Pakistan, in Egypt, in Iran. And whereas we need those dollars to procure products which we don't produce as Kenya, like petroleum, pharmaceuticals, and all the other products. And lately, when we have a deficit in food because of the climate change issues and the fact that we have not been able to sustain food security, we need dollars to basically import food to sustain our people. And this has seriously impacted, and like I said, energy, petroleum alone, honorable members, do have a requirement of $500 million on monthly basis. We import products into Kenya worth $500 million on monthly basis. We bring in 8 cargos, 4 cargos of diesel. A cargo is 80,000 metric tons. We bring in 4 cargos of PMS, that is super or petrol, and we bring in 1 cargo of DPK, dual-purpose kerosene. And at a volume of about 750 cubic meters or meter cube, that is about $500 million every month. And to be able to, under the OTS system, honorable chairs, where the product will come into Kenya under OTS and be off-taken by the petroleum companies, luckily this product came off balance sheet. It is not traded by government, it is traded by the oil industry. And when it comes into the Kenya under the OTS system, what we do immediately is they have to off-take the product within 5 days. So you see a sacking of $80 million, $160 million because we receive 2 cargos every 2 weeks. So we'll require to pay $160 million every week to be able to off-take 2 cargos, and a cumulative of $500 million for the month. And that is why we had the late nomenclature of G2G, where we went into deferred issuance of LCs, which would service after 6 months. And what that entailed, Honorable Chair, was to basically say instead of paying for petroleum products on spot purchase every 5 days when the ship docks to Mombasa, a framework agreement where we would bring products on deferred LCs that would service every 6 months, or every LC would be serviced at an age of 6 months, and that basically there would be no accumulation of paying 6 months ago, but paying as they mature for every cargo. And we did that, honorable members, to basically delay the exiting of $500 million every month, to address with my colleague, the CS Treasury, the macroeconomic issues of ensuring how do we allow those $500 million to be available to the pharmaceutical, to be available to some debt swaps which had been, some swaps which had been done on the Kenya shilling, awaiting the improvement of the dollar liquidity or availability in the country. How do we deal with the food challenge, given the drought that ravaged this region because of the climate change issues for the last 5 years? And so we were able to negotiate with friendly countries like Saudi Arabia, who are the world leading. I think they control 22% of the world oil reserves. We did work with Abu Dhabi and ENOC to work on a framework agreement that would give us products on deferred LCs, and therefore delay the exiting of dollars for a period of 6 months. That, honorable members, did give us some benefits in terms of managing the interbank spread, the speculative tendencies which were there, where everybody of the over 100 oil marketing companies were running around town every day looking for dollars for the spot purchase, and exacerbating the depreciation. Because the Minister for OCS National Treasury here will tell us how we've been able to slow down depreciation of the Kenya shilling from a high of 3% to some 1%, albeit the depreciation is still there because the tightening of the monetary policy continues because of what the background I gave in basically the US trying to manage its inflation. And we've seen countries like China and Russia trading in ruble, trading in their currencies, almost doing a barter trade in efforts to dollarize their economies, and so on and so forth. I've mentioned about tea. Those of us who trade in tea currently are not able to sell our tea because those other countries out there don't have dollars to pay us. and then so on and so forth. So this has been one thing that we've done, Chair. We were able then, under that framework agreement, to negotiate for freight and premium, because the petroleum products are traded on Platts. The OPEC countries do fixed prices every month on basis of products which is released to the market every month. So because oil is internationally traded and we've got Platts pricing, the only area you compete on is freight and premium. The cost of bringing the product and the premium which is charged by the oil marketing companies, which we did negotiate and got a fairly competitive rate. Kenya today enjoys freight and premium on diesel of $88 per meter cube, against what is obtaining today in the region, where we've seen a high of 260. I think currently Tanzania is having a freight and premium of about $160 per metric, per cubic meter or metric ton, if you do some literal conversion. So a high of 160 against Kenya 88. For PMS, we are currently having $95 per metric ton for super or petrol, whereas the region is having a fairly high rate, which I've shown in that document that I did circulate. And we've been, because we're dealing with a government to governments, agreed to that whenever the rates come down in the region, we are able to open that framework agreement and be competitive so that we are always below the pricing in the region. Albeit we can't do much on the international pricing of petroleum, which has soared from a $70 to $80 to $90. And I read an article in the Financial Times the other day, because of the Hamas and Israeli war, that that the international prices could go up to $150. And that would literally mean our products going to a high of 300 shillings per liter at the pump. We hope it doesn't get there. So we are almost managing scaling the heights as we chew the gum every day to make sure we do manage this frame. And because I did say, Chair, that these are products which are real drivers of inflation. And so we are conscious, honorable members, we are working on it on a day-to-day basis to make sure that though it's a global challenge, we do obtain the best pricing for our country. Kenya is a gateway for Uganda, Kenya is a gateway for Congo, South Sudan. And so we are not just managing for Kenya, we are trying to really obtain the best as a gateway because of our port of Mombasa, which services the other countries which are landlocked in the region. So far, what are the benefits? I've mentioned a bit that we've slowed down the depreciation, honorable members, chairs. We've managed the interbank. I think Professor Njuguna will tell us, and I'm quite happy today because when I go to these kind of meetings alone, and I talk to so much finance, and I'm lucky today to have the financial experts to support me to talk to the rate of depreciation, talk to the interbank, talk to what kind of swaps have been unwound, and the kind of profits which the multinationals have been able to expatriate, because it's also not good for investments when dollars are not available in the country. People like Safaricom doing business, and when they make a profit, they need to take their profit out, and that is really why they invest in the region. If you cannot take out your money, like sometimes in countries, our neighbors like Ethiopia, it becomes a disincentive for investors. So really, in terms of availability, in spite of the fact that it is still tight, if we did not do the G2G, the situation would have been really dire today. I don't know whether we could possibly be at 200 plus today. But the fact that we've been able to slow down sucking or exiting of $500 million every month from petroleum is a real big gain. What we're also able to do, honorable members, on petroleum is to basically say, over this period, why don't we then offtake the product as they land in Mombasa on Kenya shillings? Kenya shilling, which then sits in escrow account, earning on T-bill rate, and the T-bill rate will go to the pump over that period before we pay the international market. So the interest that is earned in the agreements that have been done, the commercial agreements that support this transaction, is taken to the pump to support the depreciation. So the yield, actually T minus 2 goes to the pump, the minus 2 goes to the banks. We also, similarly for dollars, which we are holding, because under this framework, the dual purpose kerosene, which is really the aviation fuel, is taken on the dollar by the flight industry. And the product that goes to our neighboring countries is taken on the dollar. So we do get 40% product being paid on dollar, while the Kenya product is paid on the shilling. The dollar is also invested. I think we are sitting on some $1.2 billion today. We've already serviced some 10 cargos. And the dollar, like I said, is also invested on SOFR minus 2. The yield also goes to the pump to support the industry in terms of the depreciation. So even as we sit today, except that we are unwinding the dollars, or rather removing the dollars as they mature, we are sitting on some $1.2 billion to support the repayments of the product as they mature, as the LC mature after 6 months, on the age of 6 months for that matter. So that's what we've done on petroleum. Honorable members, chairs, we are very conscious. We are working on it every day. We're looking at the region, like I said. If the freight and premium comes down, we open the contract with the 3 governments, Saudi, ADNOC, Abu Dhabi, and Emirates, to say, look, since you have this contract for 6 months, we shouldn't be paying higher premiums than what is obtaining in the region. When we look at the comparatives in terms of pricing in Tanzania today, in South Africa, go to UK, go to US, you'll possibly, I don't know whether we gave the figures there, but in some jurisdictions they are paying as much as 300 shillings per litre, where we are paying 200. So it's a global challenge. We are managing, honorable members, on a day-to-day, like I said, and we are looking for innovative solutions. What we've done lately is to renegotiate the freight and premium. Like I said, it's an open, it's not locked under the framework agreement, to bring it down. What we are doing after the proof of the system working, we've asked those countries to remove what we call confirmation. KCB alone has opened, I think, LCs worth about 800 billion. They are supported by Stanbic, supported by a number of banks, Mauritius Bank. And what has happened is, because of the risk and exposure of a bank not being able to pay, or the risk for that matter, there is need for confirmation, not reconfirmation. And because the system is working well, we are now talking to those governments to say, do we really need to confirm these LCs, which were priced at 0.7% of the cost of the, and we have negotiated to basically pledge the cash in the account today because the system is working, and therefore confirmation is removed. So we get another benefit of 0.7%, which would otherwise go to confirmation for the investment grade banks or the AAA banks who confirm and take the risk out of KCB in case of a liquidity challenge, or KCB is not able to pay for those or the risk taker for the LC issuing banks. So we are now removing. We are in the process of removing the confirmation, and we will subsequently see slight reduction on the cost of the financing facilities for this product. So that's what we are doing with petroleum. Unfortunately, there's nothing much we can do on the Platts pricing because they are set by OPEC. But on freight and premium, I can assure these honorable members and sitting that we are doing our best, and possibly Kenya is obtaining the best in the region because of the fact that the OTS system, the open tender system, is all employed in this G2G to be able to secure the support on this driver of inflation and cost of living. That's the much I would like to say for now. For petroleum, I think the details are in the paper which I've circulated. For power, because of time, power is another big driver. It's another really big driver, and we are conscious about the cost of power in this country. It's expensive. You will recall, members, that Kenya predominantly generated power from hydro. We ran Masinga, Kindaruma, Gitaru, Kiambere for a long time until we were hit by the drought of the early year 2000, when we had a huge drought and we brought in the Agrecos and the IPPs, which today are being seen to be very expensive because hydro today dispatches at about 3 to 4 cents US dollar per kilowatt hour. Very good pricing. You cannot get that kind of pricing anywhere. But because of hydrology, in the year 2000, we had to bring in these power generators that were quick to deploy. Because when you have shortage of power, you can go to the shops and buy a diesel engine and start it now and sort out your power problem. But it comes at a very huge price. They dispatch power to the grid today at anything up to 20 cents, 25 cents. And even when you go to Moroni, the Moroni GT, it dispatches power at 72 cents, 52 cents US, which is about 70 shillings per kilowatt hour. When hydro should ordinarily be dispatching at less than 7 shillings, we are dispatching at 72 shillings in Moroni. So because of that, the country then embarked on development of geothermal. And I think Kenya today is lauded as the 6th largest geothermal country utilizing geothermal, a very difficult power to develop because you do your service studies, you drill. It's like oil exploration. You drill 3 kilometers, and today we have got about 49% of our economy being supported by geothermal. So predominantly today, what we call a base load, which was yesterday hydrology or hydro, is today geothermal. And what has really helped us today is the fact that the leaders of yesterday worked so hard to develop geothermal. And if I just give some numbers to appreciate that we are not in a bad place, Tanzania today is load shedding 10 hours every day. So 10 hours, you don't have power, not because it is a blackout. It's been switched off because there is not enough power in the country. Zambia, Malawi, South Africa are load shedding into 12, 14 hours per day. Again, because of the climate change issues affecting us. Even Ethiopia, who gives us 200 megawatts at very competitive pricing of 6 cents US through a PPA we signed some times back. We've signed for 200, they are not able to give us 200. They are giving us 100 because they don't have enough water. The floods in Marsabit that we saw in the last 3-4 days have helped them to put some water in the dams. And we are now seeing slight improvement on what they are able to give us. So because of that, honorable members, hydrology, even as we speak today, though I went to the year 2000, we've not seen good rains in the last 3-4 years. We don't have water. In the data, and I'll be happy to give a supplemental onto that report which we gave, we've been dispatching 0 megawatts from Masinga for the last 2 months. We don't have water in Masinga. Even with these rains, the eastern and Your Excellency Kalonzo, you may be aware that whereas we've seen in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks rains in the west of Kenya, we've not seen much rain in the east part of Kenya, though we are beginning to see water coming up now. At a height of a low of 1035 meters above sea level, we are only having 2 meters now after the rains have just come in, but we are still not dispatching. We are doing 0 out of Masinga today.
I was there yesterday, and I can tell you it's beginning to fill up.
It's beginning to come up. In fact, we've seen 3 meters today. Of today, we are 3 meters above 1035. So, honorable members, why am I going there? When we don't have water, which was predominantly the generator for Kenya, though geothermal has really been useful lately because I said as a base load, it's not already doing 49%, we have to run the diesel. When you run the diesel, which I did give a background that it is dispatching at 70 shillings, it is dispatching at 50 shillings, you do expect the cost of power to go up. When Dr. Siror, the CEO for Kenya Power, spoke to the media the other day, he was like, would it be better not to have power at all to service a hospital or to have expensive power? It's not because we want to dispatch expensive power. If Masinga is at zero, even for you and me, you would go out and start your generator because it's better to have that expensive power than no power at all. So given the challenge of climate change and mitigation and actions that are ravaging, or rather the whole world is talking about today, as Kenya, we are accelerating geothermal development. We just brought in an additional 35 megawatts in Menengai. We are bringing another 70 megawatts. We are drilling in Paka Silali. We are at 100 megawatts of steam, and we want to put in converters to get them into generate power as quickly as possible. And these come in geothermal today because of our knowledge and capacity and availability. Geothermal is available 24/7. The solar and the wind, which is talked about on climate change platform to save the world, is not available at night. Solar is not available. As we speak, at peak hour today, we need 2160 megawatts today, but we don't have enough power. We are currently load shedding, though quite small. So we really need to bring in the base load, and solar is not available at night. When it rains like it's raining now, the Lake Turkana 310 megawatts dispatches at 20%. Kipeto dispatches at very low percentage when it rains. I think when it rains, because of the vertical force of rain, the wind almost comes down to zero. And so we have a challenge, honorable members. We are on top of it. We are quickly and like the previous regimes working on geothermal to support our base loads. We're trying to now do hybridization so that we are able to store solar and wind when it is there because of intermittence, because the price of batteries have significantly come down today. Solar panels have come down. So we're trying to deploy in the current pricing cycle 23-27, we've got some 200 megawatts of storage, battery storage system to store the solar when it is there and we don't need, because honorable chairs and members, the problem with this intermittent power, they come on a PPA framework called take or pay. When it is there, you must take it, otherwise you still pay. So why don't we store and then we use it when we need it? Because when it comes in what we call economic order merit of dispatch, they take priority number one. Whenever it comes, you take it, because if you don't take it, you still pay. So we then bring in batteries to store that power and use it when we need it, because the price of technology for storage today has come down, and then basically be able to also reduce the intermittence and stabilize the grid. One other thing which we are doing, honorable members, and which should have been done yesterday, is to deconstrain some of the transmission systems. When we came in, or when I came in, when I came in, we found, for example, let me use one, Takwel, Otum, Kitale network or line, not having capacity to transmit generation from Takwel. Because when we developed Selenkei, Sedet, and Alton, the solar power plants in the west of Rift, the transmission line capacity was not upgraded. And for the last 4 years, we are not transmitting, or we are not utilizing Takwel, which comes to the grid at 3 cents, 4 cents, because the transmission line is not able to carry both the solar from Alton, Selenkei, and Sedet, and carry the Takwel because of the order of merit of dispatch, take or pay. So what do? We carry the expensive power from solar, which is intermittent and not good for the grid, and the hydro is sitting idle because we do not put some investment of 300 million to complete the capacity of the line to evacuate that power. That is currently going on. We'll finish in a few, maybe another 2 months. Similarly for Narok, Bomet, where the network to Olkari has been built, the network from Bomet has been built all the way to Migori to support the tea factories in Bomet, Kericho, all the way to Awendo. And so we've got load shedding in Awendo, in Bomet, and Kericho in the evening. We don't have enough voltages. We are using Moroni 73 shillings power plant to support the voltages because we have not built Narok Pome to allow the Olkaria power to go all the way to our window. So again, we are currently having sourcing a contractor. We've got funding, and we'll get most of that cheap geothermal power to go all the way down to Migori County and service that western part of the country. And these are network issues that should have really been addressed in terms of getting the grid more stable and being able to off-take or to carry the kind of load, the kind of power that we need in those regions in terms of managing demand and supply for the country. Honorable members, we are conscious. We are really working on the two areas in petroleum and energy, in the grid capacity, in generation, confirming and assuring ourselves that even as we go forward to generate new power, we should go to what you would call auction for licenses so that they compete on prices of licenses as opposed to coming and negotiating privately in my office or in another office to generate power when they can be, the auction process can be done in the open and the best price IPP can take that license and generate power for us. Unfortunately, members, I must also say, power is not a quick fix. When we plan power today for the next 5 years, what we're doing is not for tomorrow. And so unless we do what we must do today, we'll have problems in 27, 28, 2029. So the challenges we are seeing today are the challenges of the yesteryears because of, and as we speak, you remember we had this moratorium. We don't have much power plants being built today, and as I talk to load shedding, what power plants are almost reaching completion to support us tomorrow, 25, 26, 27. Those are the challenges we are crumbling with, but I want to assure our honorable members that we are on top of it, and we'll ensure that we do not get into where the region is because of not planning. And so the leaders of both houses, when we removed the moratorium that was placed by the executive sometimes back, Parliament put another moratorium. We need to remove that moratorium so that we can make sure that the power plants who are ready to dispatch or the licenses that need to be signed can be signed so that we do not have challenges in 26, 27, and 28 where we could fall into where the region is today, load shedding 10, 12, 13, 14 hours a day. Honorable members, I submit. Thank you.
As we propose that we listen to your colleagues. I think that's okay, honorable colleagues, whether we listen to the presentations before we make comments or interventions. Yeah? So who is the next one to go? Hinga.
The honorable chairs and members of this committee, I'm delighted to be here this morning and humbled also to be making this presentation before my seniors. Allow me to begin by making a disclaimer. One is that, as you all know, that this housing levy is one of the things that was highly litigated. It is still before the courts. So today I'll try and avoid going to the merits and demerits of the housing levy per se, because that judgment will be made on the 24th of November, after which we should be free to talk about it in greater detail, but I'll try and cover as much as I can. Number two, Chair, is that at the end of my submission, hoping that the work of this committee will effect some changes in the Constitution at some point, hopefully, I would like to submit two requests. One is that under Schedule 4 of our Constitution, where the Senate religiously allocates resources to the counties, there is a small omission in that our Constitution has envisioned urban areas to be devolved, but it is missing in Schedule 4. And what that means is that our urban areas are not getting any resources unless it is the money from the World Bank that comes in as conditional grants. And that is a big problem because our cities and towns are dying and decaying because of lack of investment. And number two, I'd like to make a submission before this committee that we need to relook at how we address the issue of marginalization. I think the way we have defined marginalization, it is a little bit unfair to the class of people we call the urban poor. And I'd like to submit before this committee that the urban poor is probably the most marginalized person in Kenya. And we need to relook at how we define marginalization, because if we only define marginalization based on areas, and yet there is somebody who is probably a meal away from starvation, a person who has no basic sanitation, they actually pay to use ablution facilities. For someone who faces what we call the penalty of poverty, which is they pay 172% more for water than you and I. They pay up to 147% more for electricity. I think it is the high tide away. They're a huge population. Chair, before I then get into the presentation, allow me to set a little bit of context. We all know the issue of the housing levy. At some point, I had to run to my good senior, Professor Ndongo, because I was confused whether we were actually debating a housing bill or the finance bill. And so all that sweating chair that you are seeing coming out is because I was...
You become national, very famous with that sweating. And I'm happy you're talking about it because we're wondering what has become of Hinga.
Let me say, the Honorable Vice President, that when I went to Professor Ndongo for some counseling, I was expecting some lessons in economics, but he referred me to the Bible. And he read for me Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. And he told me, Hinga, out of the sweat of your brow, you shall eat. So sweating is biblical.
But the Bible seems to have helped. It's not sweating today.
Maybe a bit too early to call it. Chair, there is a very interesting report that was done by the World Bank in the year 2017. Now, like anybody who would like to make comments on the issue, matters to do with housing, just get a copy of that. It's available online. It is called Unavailable and Unaffordable. And I believe this study painted a very good picture about the housing situation in Kenya. There are things that are indisputable. And I think where things become a bit murky is the how to solve. But there are certain things that are not in dispute. Number one, we are one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. We have over 500,000 people who are coming to urban areas every year. That is a fact. Number two, Chair, is that if you look at the percentage of what you call the urban population, at the moment, and these are very old statistics, which is 2019, after the census, we had about 6.5 million Kenyans living in slums. That is also a fact. So if you're adding 500,000 people every year into urban areas, when they come to those urban areas, what do they find? Chair, they find something which is interesting, and I know a professor here will back me up because of it's a lot more in economics. Chair, what you find is that we have very low incomes in Kenya. And where you have low incomes, and then you have got very expensive land, ordinarily then what happens is that rentals tend to be very high. Okay, low incomes, expensive land, rents tend to be very high. And so, therefore, your working class, I'm not talking about people who are not working. I'm talking about your working class, people who wake up, some even earlier than we do, to go to work, cannot be able to afford
the kind of rentals that we find in the urban areas. And then what happens is that they get pushed out in a process which is called gentrification. You start pushing them out, okay? But where do they go? Some may say, why can they go to Mlolongo? Why can they go to Kitengela where there is a lot of land? The challenge, Chair, is that they need to be close to where they work. Because again, if they move further away from where they work, the cost of transport becomes a hindrance. So where do they go? They go and set up informal settlements. And that is why, Chair, as of 2019, we had 1,141 informal settlements in this country. They do nothing. If we do nothing about it, Chair, in a few years' time, our major cities will be nothing but major slums. So that's also an important context to be able to put. Now, there is a study that has been done by the Center for Affordable Housing in Africa. In 2016, Nairobi had been ranked as having the third most expensive land of the cities that were polled in Africa. Today, Nairobi has the most expensive land in the continent. So how do you have most expensive land? You have got very low incomes. And so this is an issue that I believe should be able to bring all of us together, because it is ours to solve, irrespective of which political divide you come from. Even us who live in most affluent areas, you can attest that there is a slum next to where you live. And at some point, if we do nothing, a high wall is not going to keep you safe. There will be a slum right outside your gate. And so I believe that this issue of housing should actually not divide, but actually should bring people together. I was privileged to be in the last government, honorable chairs, and housing was part of the Jubilee agenda. Also, housing was a core pillar in the Azimio manifesto. As a matter of fact, where we ended, the Kenya Kwanza proposed 3% on the levy. We actually ended at where Azimio had proposed, which was 1.5%. So I would like to believe that if we are all genuine and we put away our political caps, we can be able to look at this matter of housing, soberly, and we can be able to agree. We may disagree, we may not agree on everything, but we agree we have a challenge. So, Chair, I'm going to go very quickly to the economics of housing, because I think that is very, very, very important, the real merits of the levy itself. So I have a presentation, Chair, which is, has 4 headings, which is a quick introduction, the economic context, the economic recovery, and then I'll go a little bit into the housing fund and offerings. Chair, the Kenya Kwanza government has a plan, and our plan is to have 1 million Kenyans owning their homes in this first dispensation. Now, Chair, the reason that number is not a thumbsuck, it is because in Kenya, we have a housing demand of 250 homes a year. The market is only able to produce 50,000. And of the 50,000, only 1,000 is affordable housing. So we have got 49,000 for the high end, that is a 3%. And then 97% of Kenyans are left with the 1,000 that is being produced by the market today. So our plan is ambitious and bold, because we believe that we have a systemic failure in housing in Kenya. And for us to be able to understand how this systemic failure has stepped back into history and realize that at the turn of independence, when we came up with the housing policy, we were, as a government, building homes through National Housing Corporation, site and service, and that happened until the late 80s, when the infamous, when we got into trouble with the IMFs and the World Bank at the time, and we got into structural adjustments. And at that time, one of the things that we were told to exit from was housing. And from that point to date, The likes of National Housing Corporation has never received any funding from government. Most of you perhaps have lived in estates that were funded through National Housing Corporation or the old municipal councils. So, Chair, let me go quickly to the economics of housing, which I think is very important to understand. One, Chair, is that we know right now we are in a bit of an economic meltdown of some sort. And this did not just start now. It has been there from COVID. We never recovered from COVID. We are in Russia. We never recovered. And we are having challenges because and when economies are contracting, Chair, the objective, the primary target is to make sure that you do not get into a recession. Getting into a recession, Chair, to get out of a recession is more expensive than preventing yourself getting into a recession. Now, Chair, as I said, the do nothing is not an option. And this is a case where you get presented with bad options. When you're going through an economic meltdown, when you look at the options that you have, very few of them are good options. Then when you take the context that our economies lack resilience, we don't have enough social safety nets so that when you have an economic meltdown, you can be able to send checks to the poor people and even to the working class who sometimes get laid off. Chair, we have a situation of dilapidated supply chains. So I don't know whether I'm going backwards or forward. Okay. Then, Chair, I read something yesterday in the Nation newspaper, and I was a bit surprised by what I read there, because I guess trying to paint that this government has borrowed so much money, they failed to understand that part of the reason why our debt has increased, even without borrowing, is that because some of our borrowing is in hard currency, and our shilling has depreciated. Even without borrowing, the debt has gone up. So our currency is devaluing, we have high inflation, we have rising interest rates, we have uncertainty that is there in the market. Chair, we have seen in our own context here, we have got a huge unemployment issue, we have a huge youth bulge, we have our economy is around contracting manufacturing, we have had prolonged drought, we have had serious impact from COVID, and I've said even other places like in the US, where they are increasing interest rates to manage their own inflation, it is actually causing capital flight. If you look today at the stock exchange, the shares are misbehaving, and some of those companies have very good fundamentals, but they are depreciating. So therefore, Chair, I really want to make this point very clear that, sometimes to the public, it looks like the policymakers, maybe we just sit down and we don't really apply our minds on some of these things. It is, I sat there when COVID came knocking on our doors. And when you looked at the options that we had, there was an inverse relationship between trying to contain the disease and the economy. And Chair, there were many examples. For example, South Africa went on to what is called hard shutdown. The effect of hard shutdown, you saw, was something which was called an insurrection. People got tired of being kept at home, and they went and broke into supermarkets and took all the booze. In Brazil, on the other hand, they assumed that this is like flu. Okay, so what did they do? They were relaxed, go to the beach, enjoy yourself, in Homa, to Meishi na Homa all this time. What happened? There were caskets that were being deposited at their state house because people died. So you're faced with very challenging and balancing situation. So, Chair, during that time, you are either going to go to austerity or you have got to increase government expenditure. Now, when you look at the Great Recession, which was in 2008, if you look at what the US and Europe did, they did the opposite of each other. The US went on a major capital investment in infrastructure. Europe, on the other hand, went on a serious austerity measure. What happened is that the US got out of the recession much faster. Europe, you saw the likes of Greece and all those other places, they had a lot of challenges. Another example, Chair, is in the 1930s when we had the Great Depression. And when FDR, then the president of the US, the strategies that he put, one of them what is called the extended public works, which gave birth to something which is called the American Dream, which was many houses as you can. As we get to the economics of housing, you'll understand why there was a focus on housing because of its long supply chain. So, Chair, So there are several strategies that can stem a recession under this condition. One of them is creating consumptive demand, encouraging spending, creating jobs in industries with multiplier effect. Now, Chair, and this is almost like a paradox, because you need to be spending where money is shrinking, because revenues are contracting. But you're saying you need to spend to be able to give people more money to spend so that you don't get into a recession. So, Chair, if you look at certain economies like the US, during this economic meltdown, what did they do? During COVID, what did they do? They printed money. They gave people checks. They did something which is called qualitative easing, which is they bought back their bonds. Why? Because they wanted to make sure that there is money circulating in the economy. Because when there is an economic meltdown, what you don't want to do is lack of that spending. And so, Chair, as I get now to the context of why we have put so much emphasis on housing, it is because in Kenya, we may not have the powers to print those checks. We may not be able to have the kind of monies to buy back our bonds. But there is something that we can be able to do. And what is that? We can be able to put checks in people's hands by having a deliberate plan that is focused on creating the consumptive demand while solving a decade or a century-old problem of housing. And that, Chair, brings me to the issue of the housing levy. So, Chair, as I've said, our investment in housing projects helps us to issue what is called the stimulus check, which will make the required investment in housing, which in turn will expand enterprise, and it will create jobs, and that will be to the benefit of the citizens. Now, it's important to understand why you want money to be spent, and especially when you're talking at the lowest level, which is the local economic area. It is because, especially when you're spending money at the bottom of the pyramid, that money tends to circulate around there. You see, today, if I gave my good friend Omar Hassan 10,000 shillings, he'll probably spend it. Okay, he may know he didn't partake some of those other drinks, so maybe not a good example. But maybe those are two drinks. Maybe he'll go spend that money outside the country. If you put 100 shillings,
it's okay. You can use Opio one day.
That's why, Chair, they were not served to tea. And we were served that drink is later.
So, Honorable Wandai, I can see you after this, and I'm sure. Anyway, on a serious note, so Chair, the impact of spending money at the bottom of the pyramid is that money actually never leaves. It keeps on circulating around that area. You don't need to be an economist to believe that. But Chair, there is something that is important to understand, is that it's not like Kenyans live in open spaces. Kenyans have houses, but those houses do not meet the basic definition, what is in our constitution and even in the UN, of what is decent housing. And that is why I believe the issue of housing was in all the major parties' manifestos, okay? Because we have a problem. But Chair, to solve this, you need scale, because it is the large economy, it's leveraging the large economies of scale that you can be able to produce the jobs that we want. Chair, we talk about manufacturing, and sometimes we talk about manufacturing in abstract terms. Question is, what are you manufacturing? What are you manufacturing? Because you must have a plan. What are you going to manufacture? That is why our plan, when you look at the long supply chain of housing, from
need it, get it, eat it. Uber Eats.
4 hinges on each door. On average, a house has 5 doors. So that means those are 20 hinges you can make from just one house. If you do 200,000 homes, you do the math. How many hinges are we talking about? And as much as hinges looks like something we should not be talking about in a national dialogue, hinges could end up being a big industry because you have created the consumptive demand. That is the plan, is create the demand, then create industries, because you must manufacture for something. And so those who don't understand why we have really put so much emphasis on housing is because of the long supply chain. So if you talk about hinges, think of it. How many nails do you need in 200,000 homes? It's about 5 million kgs of nails. That's another industry. We have doors, we have windows. As a matter of fact, as a ministry, we have itemized 69 items. 69, 1, 2, 3, 68, 69 items that will be produced locally because the materials are available locally, that we are going to do at scale and create the jobs. So, Chair, this housing levy provides us with the capital to be able to scale. Because for housing, the kind of capital that you're looking for is what is called long-term capital. And we don't have investors who are going to come in with long-term capital. They start looking at risk. And what is the first thing that they look at? They look at a hustler and they say, the only thing I can see is this guy will never be able to pay. So I can never build a house for this guy. So that's why, what do? The investors, they focus on you and I. Because we have a check, we have a salary, and by the way, it is not everybody who has a salary that can afford. Let me give you some shocking statistics, Chair, and these could be dated, so we will look at the latest information. But as of 2019, Chair, 50% of all payslip carrying Kenyans earned 50,000 shillings and below. Actually, 75%, sorry. 75% of all payslip carrying Kenyans earned less than 50,000 shillings. So maybe since then there's been several increases, but that number is still what it is. 150,000, the Kenyans who earn 150,000 and above are 3%. So if you don't have a plan, because of the low wages and because of the high rentals and the high income, you're going to continue having slums coming up every day. So, Chair, that is really the economics of housing. So what does that all end up in? 3 things that housing will be able to do. One is that injection, that money that you're getting has a huge multiplier effect. Economists tell us that we can add between $1.5 and $3 for every 1 shilling we invest in housing. That is why we love housing. If you take maybe roads or any other infrastructure, that multiplier effect is not as high. The other part is jobs that will be created. And I heard a lot of people talking about Hinga nataka tu kujenga kazi yake ni ya mjengo. You know, okay, mjengo is still kazi. But the reality is, this plan gets our manufacturing alive. And that is where the jobs are created. As a matter of fact, let me take you quickly to this slide, I'll come back. Because this really demonstrates what I'm talking about. I've just taken one product, which is cement. And let's look at the value chain of cement. Chair, I know maybe the whatevers are not very clear, but I start with the yellow tracks there. And they're not yellow because of Kenya Kwanza colors. But Chair,
it's okay.
That is now, Chair, the cement manufacturing starts in quarry. It does not start in the cement factory. It starts in the quarries. So if we are going to do 200,000 units a year, we need 18 million bags of cement. 18 million bags of cement. We produce cement in Kenya. So we will have a lot of jobs at the guys who are in quarries. But then there is a guy who is excavating, there is a guy who is loading, there is a guy who is driving the truck. Those trucks, Chair, it's a huge economy, logistics. Those are new jobs you're going to create. Then the truck goes to the factory with the raw material. When you get to the factory, Chair, what do you find there? Okay, you have people who are going to offload. They are very different from those who are going to be putting it in the whole manufacturing process. And quickly, Chair, then there is another truck there, the red one. Now you can see why it is different is because this truck is not the same as the truck that took the limestone from the quarry. These are different. These are new job that you have created. Then it comes to the construction site. At the construction site, you still need people to offload. You have your batching plant. You've got people who mix the mortar, and some of them you can see we use wheelbarrows, and they will carry the mortar. And the guy who's carrying the mortar is very different from the guy who is actually doing the construction or fabricating the panels. Chair, this is just one product, which is cement. So I can tell you, Chair, that the economics of housing makes a lot of sense. And that is just one product. And you can take any other product, Chair. And we didn't even talk about packaging. There is a whole new packaging because those cement needs to be in different packages as they get taken to the site. Chair, you know, we talk about Juakali industries and we talk about informal traders. And sometimes we talk about them in abstract form. I have had a chance to interact with them, Chair. And let me tell you, these are some of the hard-working guys, but they do not get a fair share of the shake. And I'll tell you why. We experimented with a group, or 3 groups, of Ngong Road, Kamukunji, and Kariobangi, when we did Park Road housing. We gave them 7,000 doors to do. Chair, we gave them to do doors because we know they already know how to make doors. These guys, that 7,000 doors came, including installation, came to about 123 million. That's probably the biggest check they had ever seen. But Chair, what is the problem? Is that they know how to make doors, but between them and the user of the door, there are about 5 people who each make more money than them. They are the guys who are having to fabricate the doors, but several people in between are making more money, brokers, than these Juakali people. So how do we then get the Juakali people to formalize? This is what we did. We gave them a contract to do 7,000 doors. It was 123 million. They did the doors, Chair, and I can confirm they did good doors. And they were paid. And Chair, 58 of them ended up being homeowners in the same houses where they were building those doors. And the final thing is, when they got paid, because they were informal, they didn't know about a guy called KRA. And soon, KRA came knocking on their doors to say, you owe me money. And so they came running to me and they said, PS, KRA is going to shut down our accounts because we owe them money. So I had to call the CG then. I told him, these are honorable people. They will pay you because they're still owed a bit of money, but midwife them because now they become new taxpayers. We are talking about 17, 18 million Kenyans who are today maybe not in the tax bracket. If we do housing at scale, we start to bring them into the tax bracket. We can't keep on talking about 3 million Kenyans and we have no plan. This is the plan to formalize them. Give them a product, give them the support, and they will be able to produce. So, Chair, this is the summary. Do housing projects at scale. You're going to create jobs, and you're going to have a very long cash circulation process. Because of time, Chair, if you look at the economics of 200,000 homes, that is per year, if you look at the numbers that I gave, if 200,000 homes at an average of about 2.3 million shillings a house, average, yeah? That gives you 460 billion. That is a cost. Out of the 460 billion, Chair, if there is a multiplier effect of 3 times, okay, it means that you have injected in the economy 1.15 trillion shillings. So the levy that we are collecting today, once we scale it up, we should be able to get a lot more money in the economy. Then, Chair, if you take the 10.5% of the mjengo is labor, then it means that we will have about 48.3 billion of money going to wages. So we have got more people coming into the wage bracket. They become more taxpayers. Professor Ndongo is very happy because he's collecting more money, and we are building the nation. And then, Chair, if you look at the average number of formal and informal jobs, you can do up to 2.1 million jobs when you at peak time. So those are the numbers, and I've given the assumptions there. Now, a quick summary of why then this housing levy. We look at it from two sides in financing, supply side and demand side. Chair, on the supply side, that is where the developers are. Today, developers are only developing for those who can pay, as I've said. Number two, they cherry pick. They cherry pick. Why? Because they say money is not emotional. You know, they want to go to where the money is going to give them the highest return. Now, let me demonstrate to you. This year alone, I have advertised so many projects. I'm sure you've been seeing them in the newspapers. The first round I advertised was around Nairobi Metropolitan. I had an influx of investors who wanted to take up those homes. Second round, I went to Western Kenya, Kisii, Migori, all those places. I had one investor out of 55 parcels of land that I whatever. Now, Honorable Wandai and the people from that block, you're also Kenyans. You also deserve affordable homes. So if today we say, let's go and leave it to the private sector, what is the private sector going to do? They're only going to focus on where they're going to get a return. So that is why this housing levy gives us the ability to be able to build these homes indiscriminately in every part of our country. And that's why I wrote to every member of parliament and I requested that you give us land in your constituency. Think about it, 200 units, Honorable Wandai, 200 units is average of about 500 million shillings. That is about 5 times your CDF. That means there's going to be so many jobs back at home. There will be lots of industries. Your local hardwares are going to thrive. So, Chair, that's the reason why we need to do something on the supply side, because investors will only focus on those who can afford. On the demand side, though, on the other hand, we talked about low incomes. So the buyers, they lack adequate funding. They do not qualify for mortgages. They'll walk to a bank and the bank will look at them and tell them, listen, you don't qualify, period. The existing mortgages are too costly. Chair, in this high rising interest regime, I'm sure most of you have got a mortgage. Some of your mortgages have reached 18-20% now as we speak. This government is committing through this housing levy to give every Kenyan who wants, because it is not designed for certain people, it's for every Kenyan. If you're in social housing, we'll give you a house at 3%, fixed. Fixed until you finish paying, or Jesus comes, whichever comes first. Number two, if you're in affordable housing, we'll give you fixed at 6% for up to 30 years for you to pay. If you are in market, because majority of the working class are in that market bracket, you're not also forgotten. We're giving you 9% fixed. That is half of what you're paying today in the market. And that has been made possible because of this levy. Because the levy is giving us scale, is giving us cheap funding that we are able to advance to Kenyans. So, Chair, this figure here, I'm just going to say, it is the pooling of money from yourself, myself. We bring it together in the fund, and then we are able to give the developer an offtake, so that now the developer does not have to say, this Juakali artisan or that Mamamboga cannot afford. What they see, they don't see Mamamboga, they see the fund. Because the fund will give them a guaranteed offtake, that if you build these houses, according to the contract, we will offtake those units. That's what that slide says in many numbers. And this is the summary of what I've said. We have got various models for social housing, that is for people who earn 20,000 and below. Today, if you earn 20,000 and below, you'll get a house which you'll only pay 3,200 on a diminishing number, that is on a depreciating or amortized number. So you start 3,200, and as you go into the future, that figure is going to be coming down. That is for 1 room, 2 room is 4,800, 6,400. By the way, Chair, these numbers here are not a thumbsuck. These figures, this is the average rental that is being paid by these people who, so that is what that slide means. The next slide is now the This is now for those who are in affordable housing bracket, and that is those who earn 20,000 and 150,000. That is how we defined you. You will get a studio unit if you want to start a park in life for 5,200 shillings only. You get a 2-bedroom house for 10,400, and you get a 3-bedroom house for 15,600 shillings. Chair, those figures are made possible because of this housing levy. And lastly, those who are in the market, there is something for you as well. You will get a much bigger unit with better finishes, and you will be able to get, let me get these figures here, 31,300 for a 2-bedroom house, which is quite big, which is 60 square meters, and you'll be able to pay 41,800 for an 80 square meter unit. Chair, there is one more category, which is our folks in the rural areas. If you're in the rural areas, I've got good news for you, is that we will come, we are working with our TVET colleges, with our ABMT centers. Honorable Kalonzo, I have got an ABMT center in Mwingi, where we are putting what we call hydroform machines. And these hydroform machines, they use what is called stabilized soil blocks. Okay, so we can be able to get as many young people to come. And for every block they make, we will pay them 3 shillings. And we will use those blocks to convert the mud houses into decent homes. And if you do that, we'll also be able to give you a facility which you will be paying for a period of time, and it is going to be at 6% if you want to build your rural home. And if you're in the social housing category, you still get it at 3%. So there is something for everybody in this affordable housing agenda. Chair, I really thank you for giving me enough time to prosecute this issue, and I will be ready for any questions. Thank you.
We thank you so much, Wanahinga. By the way, in Mwingi, we had when Mwingi women are themselves building their own houses. No hydroform, good plants. You have plants. Who is the next one?
Below, then Rogo.
And then Rogo.
They have come from after the CS National Treasury.
Oh, yeah.
Zim will be telling us what plans they have.
They want to come after Juguna or Juguna first?
After Juguna, because they need to hear him.
I think so.
Yes.
Prof.
But,
I think everybody is really looking for you. They want to hear. Give a bit of comfort like you did to Hinga.
I thought you should be the last. Chair.
I think Kenyans need a bit of comfort.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
I thought you could be the last after the rest are finished, then he wraps up.
Well, what do you feel? Either way.
I'm okay, Chairman, with wrapping up because.
Wrapping up.
Yes.
Okay. So we go to Bilo.
It will all come to you. So Rugo and Bilo.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Serious problems. We increased expenditure from 3.3 trillion to now 3.98, almost 4 trillion. In a year when we are already facing challenges, our revenues are going down, the KRA is not able to meet the targets. So what will happen? If this revenue is not going to, targets are not going to be met, that 4 trillion is going to be, part of it is going to be the borrowing. Already in the budget, I think that figure is going to be significantly higher, Mr. Chairman, if this appetite for spending continues. The control of budget was here recently. I think her office is one of the problems we have in this country. When Parliament approves budget, and then you come around, you go to a government ministry, Mr. Chairman, they don't have money to buy photocopy paper. And it has been voted for by Parliament. Money has been voted, appropriations have been passed, exchequer release must be as per the appropriation. So there's no reason why a program or an activity for which a budget has been made and appropriation has been voted does not have money to run throughout the year. And yet the entire money voted 3.9 later will be shown as having been spent. And all those appropriations and releases are approved by the control of budget. So I think Treasury, with due respect to my good professor friend here, Parliament,
has approved appropriations, but Treasury has abandoned them, ignores them with abandon. That is, let me put it that way. I'm sure he will tell me off, but he's my friend, so I will welcome it. Now, so we are in a debt trap, Mr. Chairman. We are simply rolling over debt for lack of ability to pay, or taking a new loan to pay the previous loan, all these things. But let me say that the continued borrowing by the government as if it is business as usual, or because we have a rapport with IMF, is dangerous. It's dangerous, Mr. Chairman. And I think government must really look at what they are doing and say, let us live within our means. We cannot continue, on that path. It is going to be dangerous. Okay, then the other issue I've been asked, the cost of government, again, is misplaced priorities. That is our Achilles heels, misplaced priorities. And I want to talk about the housing fund in this regard. Do you really need to build houses, Mr. Hinga, for the people of Kenya? Or are you going to, would it not have been better, if we look at our priorities, to spend that money to build the 10,000 classrooms that the CBC requires, and the schools are struggling? Is it not better to spend part of that money to give to help so that they can finance students to pay their school fees? Is it not better to spend that money, give to Ministry of Education so that they can send the capitation for schools? I mean, where are our priorities in government? That is where our challenge is, always. Misplaced priorities. And so I want to conclude by talking about the policies. And this, I want to really urge those of you who are in Parliament who are here, and also the government, policies of the government. There seems to be a rush in this particular administration to change the existing government policies. And I think it's at a price to Kenyans. And I'll give those examples of that. Those examples. The numerous attempts to change policy and legislative framework in various sectors in the short term is proving to be an economic burden to the taxpayers and to the cost of living. The housing fund, I'll give you an example. The NHIF restructuring, the CBC, the Hustler Fund, Maisha Number, new help funding structure, G2G petroleum deal. I'll comment about that later. This reform, that reform. I think we need to do these things over the medium and long term. That's what I think, Mr. Chairman. I think trying to do so many things, changing many things in the short term is going to be at a price. We end up borrowing money, we'll end up taxing Kenyans, we'll make the situation worse for the people of Kenya. I think we need to, yes, you're a new administration, but there's need to spread some of these things over the medium term, so that we don't have these challenges. Lastly, I want to comment on the energy, Mr. Chairman. And I'm lucky today that my friend Churchill is here and he talked about it. In September 2013, and I remember because I was in Senate, in September 2013, Mr. Churchill was the Cabinet Minister for Energy. And he did announce, I remember, that we will have our output of power increased to 5,000 megawatts. And he said the target is within 3 years. And most of that was going to come from geothermal. And in fact, at that time, the discussion was, do we have the demand for all that power? That was the discussion. The potential for geothermal in this country, from what the ministry has been announcing over the years, is up to 10,000 megawatts. This is one of the greenest energy, clean, and it's cheaper than all these others. Mr. Chairman, 10 years later, that dream has not been realized. My worry is 5 years from today, we'll be sitting on the same table discussing about the cost of power. We have said, let us finance Kenya Power. Kenya Power is being financed by Kenyans. These days, I refer to it as a criminal enterprise because we support them on exchange. They bill you to recover the loss of exchange. If the shilling changes today, the dollar changes, you pay for it. Inflation changes, you pay for it. Why would that company be making loss? Why would that company be making loss perennially? And we are told, we have to support it. I ran last year, June, we were paying 3 million shillings electricity bill. Last month, we paid 6.1 million. The same capacity consumption. So you can't develop a country if your cost of energy, yes, monthly.
Okay.
For a small enterprise.
You can never develop a country if the cost of energy, it's something like that. So I think, with respect, Mr. Chairman, unless we deal with the issue of power, we cannot talk of developing this country forward. When the power was reliable, and it was cheap, and it was available, Kenya was a powerhouse for manufacturing. The whole of Eastern Africa was dependent on Kenya. Today, our manufacturing is gone. It's not only contracting. There's an exodus over the last 10, 15 years by many companies. People have moved to where the cost of production is cheaper. Because cost of production is the main thing. You can't compete. If my water is going to be, every time we're thinking of manufacturing, you are thinking of how much is it going to cost. Will I be able to sell? So that's the challenge. And energy is one of the largest, the main component. Plus, of course, the many regulatory and other challenges that we have. So I think, Mr. Chairman, let me leave it, and then we'll deal with questions, so in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Well, we thank you. Please.
You said you're going to comment on the G2G. You need to understand that.
Oh, yes. I was, once upon a time, as the chairman said, was in petroleum. I left 5 years ago. But let me say this, and I think the CS has said it. The open tender system that we had was very efficient. In fact, it was so efficient, it has been copied by other companies. What they do, the ministry was doing, was very commendable. They aggregate the total demand for fuel, for example, for next month from the market. If it is 100 million liters of diesel, then they would tender. The ministry would do an open tender, very transparent, and then the companies would, because it's the mean average price in Dubai. Plus, of course, the only thing you quote for is the premium. And because of that competitiveness, we were getting I can tell you for a fact, I don't know of a time when we have ever paid more than $40. In all my life, I was in petroleum. $40 per cubic meter for the premium. It's always 10, sometimes even negative. Some of the big companies, because they source, for many of their chains in other countries, they were even giving negative. I do remember one time. Then we go to G2G. G2G. I have written about it, and I have said this is a crooked deal. We go from $20 to $40 to $100 premium. We were told it will be cheaper. It is not cheaper. We were told it will help on the dollar. It has not helped on the dollar. Find out the day this thing was announced, what the dollar rate was and what the dollar rate is today. We're buying in our industries at 156, average the whole of last week. So it has not helped. It has not helped. Look at what the president of Uganda announced yesterday. He said they've gone into their own. One of the places we are making money as petroleum companies in Kenya is the export to South Sudan and Uganda and Rwanda and those countries. And you get that one in dollars. The transit portion is in dollars, and people are making, that is where you get the dollars, as the CS said, which is true. But today, if Uganda decides to go that route, which they announced, then obviously it will not only impact on the business aspect, on the economy in terms of what we were, all those companies and businesses who are doing that, but also it will impact on the G2G deal itself. That and we were told theirs is even cheaper. I don't know the details, but I'm sure CS knows. But I think it's part of the tweaking that we're doing on policies that is causing all this, which I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Abraham.
Thank you.
If you can be as quick as Bill was.
Yeah, I will. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much to this committee for.
Just hold on. Now put on your mic. Put on your mic now.
Good now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's really a pleasure to come and join as fellow Kenyans as we discuss these matters which are really of concern. I work in a space where we have also spent a lot of time thinking about this and speaking and presenting. And one of the questions I asked myself when I got the letter was, what more should I say? Because we have said to Parliament, but this provides an opportunity to be able to speak. I will not repeat the matters that Bilo has spoken to, but let me bring us to attention that as we speak right now, according to the statistics we have of 2021, 22 million Kenyans are below the poverty line. And therefore, when we say this, we basically, and that could have changed. In the last 2 years, a lot has changed. Incomes have not increased, if anything, and I have shared in the paper that I've presented. The incomes are actually on a negative growth. And therefore, we are not talking about some utopian institution out there. We are talking of real people. We are talking of Kenyans spread across this republic who cannot put food on the table, who now, because of the cost of the high cost of living, have to choose between medical care and school fees. And you would wonder, so should they worry about medical care now, or should they worry about the future of their children and their education and the like? And therefore, I needed to present that number. That 22 million number is an important number, because then it puts a face, it puts a life of somebody in this conversation. And then the slow growth of incomes. I will not talk about so much about the cost of living because that will be the core of what I present. But one of the biggest challenges where we are is that incomes have not changed in the last couple of years. If anything, during the COVID period, and I was just looking at the budget speech that the CS read, earlier this year, there are very few Kenyans who are earning, even be above the figures that we basically increase the taxes. I think it was about 1.1%. So you have a very huge population for who earn much more, but even the incomes have not changed. And the report I'm looking at here is basically by 2021 we are on a negative 6% in terms of decline in incomes. I will not say so much about the dollar, but the dollar has a compounding effect. And therefore, let me speak to the things that we think are critical for us to think about. Public debt and debt servicing has been presented by Bilo, and I'm sure the CS will also speak. The question of in-year deficits, in other words, how deficits grow within the year, is a matter of concern. Mr. Chair, if I was just to just present and say that every year our deficit within the year has increased, say for 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023, where we had a negative 16% and a negative 5%. 2014, 2015, we had a 99% increase in deficit from 367 billion to 732 billion. The year we are talking about, 2022, 2023, 2024, this current financial year, as per the supplementary budget published last week but one, we already have a 20% increase in the deficit from 720 to 864 billion. Unless we rein in the deficit problem, we will still continue to run with a public debt problem that we are unable to manage. And this is important because when you look at the trend, these are changes that happen within the year. Mr. Chairman, if our revenues are not performing, why should our expenditures increase? Why don't we rationalize our expenditures? I want to confirm to this honorable team that I don't think we have a revenue problem. Every year our revenues have been growing year on year, an average of 10%. We have a spending problem. And somebody who is struggling with Fuliza, Tala, branch does not need more money. Needs a behavior change. And therefore it is important for us to rein in. Because what we are doing is that we are borrowing more and more and more. But where are we borrowing from? When you look at our debt currently, it's at about 50% each in terms of domestic to external. The debt servicing that we are paying just one step behind. That whereas our debt is big, our biggest risk exposure is within the domestic market. Mr. Chair and co-chairs, I think this is a matter that we are not having a conversation on. This year alone, we expect to raise a revenue of about 2.5 trillion Kenya shillings. Let me bring it down. We expect to raise about 250 shillings in ordinary revenue. Our consolidated fund services, which includes pensions and constitutional expenditure, is 200 shillings. I'm just using average, it's 2.078 trillion. Out of that, our debt repayment is 1.86 trillion, 186. So do the math, 250 minus the 200, which these are non-discretionary expenditure. So they basically, it's a must pay, it's a must spend. Of that 180, 100 is to the domestic market. Now, why is the domestic market important? It is because a lot of that borrowing has been on double digit. 12%, I think the last coupon I saw was at about 15%. In other words, we are highly at risk because with all that money being held by government, what it has done is that government basically is competing with private sector, with private individuals in the domestic credit market. That is important because when you read the story of what has happened in Greece, in Argentina, recently in Ghana, then it is the domestic market, the famous haircuts, were taken in the domestic market. But why is it important? If you have only, and if you add appropriations in aid, it's another 400 billion, so basically 290 shillings in my simplified figure. What you're saying is that teachers alone will cost you 400 billion. In other words, if you just add teachers' salaries to the consolidated fund services, all the money in ordinary revenue is gone. You've not even paid for military costs. You have not done transfers to devolution. And therefore, I want to suggest to this honorable committee that we have a debt crisis. And it is important that for us to have part of this national dialogue is perhaps to start having a conversation on how do we restructure. I'm avoiding the word default. How do we manage ourselves out of this situation because we do not have money to provide public services? And we have tried to analyze, because when you look at expenditure in social services, you look at expenditure to county governments in terms of the transfers we are making to county governments, everything is on 0%. It's only debt servicing that is on a higher upward trend. We have a crisis. And the earlier we accept we are in a crisis, they say the first step, after denial is acceptance. We need to accept that that is where we are. Because if we don't have this conversation, and there's interesting, the former Greek minister of Greece for finance in Greece has written an interesting paper, and he said one of the biggest problems is that they kept denying that there was a problem until finally, in fact, the paper is called The Denial of the Greek Debt Problem. We cannot continue to say that we are sustainable. We are not sustainable. If we are to provide, something we'll have to give, and it's either public services or how we organize. I think I've executed that matter to the best, because as long as public services will suffer, otherwise we have to borrow more, because this deficit that we have now increased to 864 billion. Where do we expect to get the money from? We have to borrow more. High taxation. As a result of the kind of situation we have where the space, the fiscal space we have is limited, you then have to raise taxes. But who are you raising these taxes from, I beg to ask? Including the housing levy, which I still don't understand the concept. And I consider myself among the Kenyans who read public documents, perhaps more voraciously. And I still don't understand why you are taking more money from people for a concept. 80% of Kenyans, and this is the only thing I'll say on housing, live in their own homes? Have you asked them the kind of housing they need? I rest it there. High taxation, therefore, because of the situation we find ourselves in, the only option left is to raise more taxes. Is to raise more taxes. Is to raise more taxes. And when you raise more taxes, the group that you are targeting is only two kinds of individuals or legal persons. Is a corporate institution, a business entity, a premise that is registered and that is providing a public service. Sorry, providing a good to the public and therefore they purchase it, or an incomed citizen. That incomed citizen also has to pay taxes in terms of VAT, because income even includes a person who gets 100 shillings, in terms of their daily. And therefore, when we are thinking about taxes, would it be time to actually rethink the speed at which we are introducing taxes in a context where even the business environment is shrinking and incomes are not necessarily growing? I think here is a pacing question. And what do we introduce? Can you introduce all these taxes at the same time? But let me speak to the one on energy, because that is a critical one. Here, you have diesel that, of course, drives a lot of the IPPs in terms of energy, and I really thank Mr. Chirchir here, because he's really explained quite well. But that diesel already had been charged a tax, so almost one could argue, are we going through a situation of double taxation? But when you look at the taxes, and we did outline, just in the pump and the EPRA has really provided. You have excise duty, you have road maintenance levy, you have petroleum development levy, you have petroleum regulatory levy, you have railway development levy, you have anti-adulteration levy, merchant shipping levy, import declaration fee, and value added tax. And when you work out those numbers, you find that out of the 217, for instance, you will pay at the pump, 80 shillings of that is taxes. Wouldn't this be the best place, for instance, to say, given the situation we are in currently, can we pause? Can we give a rebate? Well, because why should the cost always be transferred to the consumer? Can it be the other way around? To say, can we give a pause to some of these taxes because of the state? Because we are talking about cost of living. Now, all this is compounded in the fact that in October, from the statistics again we have, 13% transport, there was a 13% increase in transport costs in terms of inflation. So that tells you that 13% in terms of increase, in transportation costs gets transferred to all institutions. Finally, and perhaps to an animal that we have not given a lot of attention, I want to present that if we are going to manage the cost of government and the cost of living right now, we have to make a decision on what to do with state-owned enterprises. 25 to 28%, and I'm using that figure because we are to confirm for now, is of MDA's expenditure is by state corporations. Those state corporations, the last count we have made, they are at about 248 of them. These are not the 48 county governments, neither are they the 22 ministries at the national level. These are institutions, some doing duplicate work in different ministries, 25%. Now, this, when you go to the budget, is also the space where we don't have very much transparency about what goes on. We only find figures when there is need for a bailout for Kenya Airways. I'm giving an example because it's the one, for instance, in the supplementary first budget here has an increase of 1.7 billion in guaranteed debt to Kenya Airways. It's in the books. And during the review, the stock risk exposure, according to the BPS 2023, during the review period 2022-2023, the stock of risk exposure is estimated at 2.7 trillion, where 2.66 trillion is from state-owned enterprises. This is from the National Treasury report. So in other words, you are stuck with many structures that give you the highest risk with the least transparency. If you ask me, Mr. Chair, co-chairs, I think if we are going to deal with the cost of living, let us action on matters of how do we manage debt moving forward, including dealing with the deficits. Let us make a very decisive decision. What do we do with taxation that has to do with fuel, because that is being translated to every part of the economy. And let us action. There is a whole report on merging, selling state-owned enterprises. In fact, I think PBO and Bwana Masinde is here, did an estimate that if you were to sell, if you were to privatize some of them, I think will make about 30 billion annually. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now give him the floor to tell us whether he plans to do something about them. And this is the beauty of this engagement and this dialogue, is that you have an opportunity to say what you have said to other institutions. Bilo has been very well heard in the media, and now he can be heard by Kenyans, and the CS can hear him, both CS National Treasury and Energy. So, Professor.
Thank you very much, members and the co-chairs and everybody else who is listening. It's actually a very informative debate, which actually can push me even to ask questions. But I would make sure that I don't do that. The DNA in me will be suppressed. The DNA in me is that I'm a teacher. So I would suppress that, Your Excellency. You already are familiar with that. But I wanted to find out, I want advice from you, Your Excellency, co-chair, and Bwana Kimani Ichung'wah, the co-chair. Should I first of all comment on what has gone through, or should I first of all do I had some written submission on the 3 areas that I was asked to talk about. But I'm also, they also interlinked with some of the issues that have come up.
I think the best, my view, Kimani may have a different view, is you please make your presentation.
Okay.
And then after that, comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without necessarily repeating what has already been said.
Okay. I think the statement I started with was on the cost of living and also related issues to that. And what I did was to prepare some responses that would actually try to explain where we are. Because I think, I'm sorry to say that sometimes when we find ourselves in a problem, we start thinking that that problem has just emerged. It has been there. It is the problem that we failed to arrest the problem that we find ourselves in the same problem. So, in fact, when I looked at this, I said, yes, it is important for us to look at the cost of living. But also, we have to also ask ourselves, how is it computed? How does it come about? Why are we beaten twice by this problem? And it has come up several other times. So in this presentation, I want to look at the cost of living. I want to look at the implications of the Finance Act 2023. I also want to look at the implications of what has come so severally on the removal of any taxes, levies, and charges to cushion Kenyans against high cost of living and the attendant cost to the economy. Let me start off with the cost of living. Honorable Chair, co-chairs, let me start by defining the cost of living. And this is the amount of money that people need to spend in order to buy the basic goods or services such as foods, clothes, and payment for, especially, and even in terms of where they live. I think Abraham has used that as trying to define who is below the poverty line. But the poverty line is actually composed of a survival kit. So it could be different, but it's something that we can come back to.
And the cost of living is often used to compare how prices of goods and services have changed over time, over a period of time, and given the area or in a given area, but more importantly, how expensive is it computed or is it shown in terms of to live in a particular area versus another. That's why you find that we have a basket of goods that are measured every month, and every 3 months there's a survey for different cities in the country and 3 different categories of people: higher, medium, and low income basket of goods. So it's computed as an average of that. But what are the factors that drive the cost of living? First is to understand that the cost of living is actually measured through the Consumer Price Index, and it is reported every month by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And the cost of living, the Consumer Price Index is actually used to measure inflation by tracking the changes of the prices by the consumers in the targeted basket of goods and services over time. Inside that basket, there are tradable goods. Inside that basket, there are non-tradable goods. I'll come back to that to try and explain what is happening in the 2 categories of tradable goods and the non-tradable goods. They have different effects, especially when it comes to nominal exchange rate movements. And even before I leave that, the non-tradable goods will drive the real exchange rate, while the tradable prices will mimic the exchange rate movements. Honorable Co-Chairs, as you may be aware, inflation rate has remained above the government range of 5.25, let's say 5% and 2% radius or dimension from both sides. That is 7.5% and 2.5%. That range, above that range means, especially a high, it means that inflation is high. It's in a regime of high inflation. And this is from June 2022 to June 2023. And that means that you can actually argue that the cost of living was high during that period. The policy range is well percent on the other side. And we do believe that when it is below the 2.5%, we believe that it's deflation. And when it's above, it's high inflation, above 7.5%. And this is mainly as a result of commodity prices, especially food and fuel. And this has come due to multiple shocks. And so many people have talked about those multiple shocks. The biggest problem of shocks is that, especially from the supply side, is that we don't have solutions from the supply side. You have to bring back the supplies. But if you don't have the supplies, then you also have to take measures to bring to reduce the price level. And those measures sometimes, or most of the times when it's purely supply side effects, they induce the economy into a recession. And you can imagine a combination of recession and inflation is what we used to call it stagflation. Let me give you an example. If food prices are rising because there is no food, the only solution is to bring food into the market. Otherwise, prices will continue rising. If you're constrained by using the demand side tool, that is, you tighten monetary policy, what you are doing is that you are actually trying to dislodge the plateau of high prices in future, but otherwise you have not solved the scarcity value problem. So we have a scarcity problem. And we have so many people have repeated the crisis we have gone through. It's a layer of multiple crises. In fact, what I actually argue that you have crises that are persistent. Most of the time we believe that crises will be short-term. They will peter out. But these are persistent. It means that they create a permanent effect or a structural effect. And you have seen that in, especially during the COVID time, the Ukrainian crisis, the ravaging drought, all these are persistent shocks. And so they create a heavy impact in terms of food scarcity and the scarcity value rises. But of course, at the end of the day, when we thought we had gone through this, then obviously there was tightening monetary policy in the advanced economies. For many years, we thought that the quantitative easing would be prolonged. But of course, we are paying the price that heavy liquidity in the market since or after the global financial crisis, we are paying for this. And that's why you find that the US continue to tighten monetary policy. In fact, even now, as of 2 days ago, we were discussing and everybody argued, and including in the US Secretary to the Treasury, told us about 3 weeks ago that their core inflation is still high. If core inflation is still high, it means that their interest structure will continue to be high. Ours is not core inflation, which is high. Ours is the inflation that is coming from food and fuel effects, which is transmitted to us because we are importing a lot of food. There's a scarcity value. Fuel prices are rising. And of course, it's also exacerbated by the nominal exchange rate movements because domestic traded prices will mimic the movements in the exchange rate. Now, we rely very much on the imported fuel, so it means that there is very little we can do about that. It's only trying to innovate around it. And of course, I've listened to some comments about the G2G. I think my colleague here will come back to say most of the African countries are asking us, how are you doing it? Because you have managed to actually run away from the two effects that we were salvaging ourselves. One of them is because of the dollar depreciation effect. Initially, we have said that it is coming from the US effect, but I'm going to argue later to show that we are paying for the past policy mistakes. Let's not hide. Somebody said, we are Kenyans, we live in Kenya. We should own up the mistakes so that we don't repeat them again. So the biggest impact right now on the nominal exchange rate is actually our own past mistake. But because my colleague here may come back to talk about the G2G, it is, if we continued without the G2G, it would not have worked. Things could have been quite devastating. Uganda, as just my friend Bero has mentioned, they are trying to run what we are doing because they think they can do it better, but there are so many headwinds. Tanzania was coming to run from us. They couldn't manage because one of the things is that the domestic market must be efficient. We have a domestic market in terms of fuel and even palm prices that is efficient. What we wanted to support it is, how do you source the dollars? Can we have a deferred LC? Trade finance is risk-free. We argued for other people, even including by IMF, for about 6 months about how trade finance works. It's risk-free. We have to move to situations where we have to go into structured finance for us to be innovative to solve ourselves from the current crisis, current problems that we are facing. Now, what policy mistakes have contributed to this outcome of high cost of living? Mr. Co-chairs, the rising cost of living in the country is also as a result of an ineffective and also inadequate policy intervention that resulted in aggravating the already dire situation. And some of these interventions include subsidizing consumption of goods instead of production to respond to the rising costs of living. And fuel subsidies alone itself was so heavy, it was not very sustainable. And we do agree, it has nothing to do with the political positioning here. It is a whole issue of saying, what is the magnitude and where could we have gone with it? And this was because the consumption basket of fuel for the people, actually, one of the realities is that we were not subsidizing the poor by fuel subsidies. We were actually subsidizing everybody else, but not the poor. And this is because in the consumption basket, if you open it up, you'll see that the fuel for people at the bottom of the pyramid is marginal compared to those to the middle and upper income groups. The second subsidy was on maize flour, and the whole issue is who benefited, because though only a few benefited because only a few manufacturers were able to access the market through using that subsidized maize flour. So many things have been written on this, but the most important thing is that it did not reach out. Now, investments in enhancing agricultural productivity are hampered by gaps in food supply chain that contribute to import dependency and even post-harvest losses. And this is a point that Biro Keros mentioned, that I'm a person who is fond of market. This is where market failure has actually pushed us the wrong way. When markets don't function, in a sense, what you're really saying is that production will fail downstream. So it is no magic, because you are not going to produce if the market is not going to give you the returns. It is no magic also that if you cannot appropriate returns from your own investment, then you cannot invest. That's why we have a secular decline of the manufacturing sector. What Hinga is trying to do here is, why he's saying we need interventions. On one of the interventions is housing. For us to revive the manufacturing sector, let's be Kenyans, let's accept our mistakes. There is no way you're going to find people producing food if you cannot sell the food. You cannot sell maize, you cannot sell your rice, you cannot produce. When markets are functioning, then you know that upstream, downstream, you increase production and productivity. Then, when you are there, and Kenyans, we are known for smallholder production, upstream, you're observing higher incomes. That gate, that bridge that we have destroyed, that somebody has captured the market, then it means that you cannot produce food at the appropriate time. And with, I remember, Your Excellency, we moved, remember our discussion on production, transport, processing and transportation. That will facilitate storage. There's nothing with the current technology that we cannot store. So essentially, we could have benefiting from other periods that we could have done very well. Kenya, like many other countries, are also experiencing foreign exchange challenges due to the rise in US interest rates. And this is compounded by misaligned exchange rate and the adoption of managed exchange rate system. In the last 6 years, we have actually said, actually in the last 7 years, so we can actually say the system led to a collapse of the interbank, because you want to manage the two-way exchange and restrict how much it can. Then in the process, the interbank collapsed. Now, at the same time, Your Excellencies, let me say also, the government was heavily investing in infrastructure projects and other mega projects, even expressway. What is the effect? The effect of that investment is actually to bid the prices of non-tradable prices up. Okay? The non-tradable prices starts rising because of that heavy investment. Because of that, if you wanted to compute the real exchange rate, because we need to look at real figures here, it is the reciprocal of the non-tradable prices. But that is too complex. Let me reduce it a little. If the non-tradable prices are reflecting the real exchange rate, what should happen is that the nominal exchange rate must move to equilibrate the situation. Otherwise, the whole economy will be at a disequilibrium. That is why the nominal exchange rate is the automatic stabilizer. I emphasized this in 2010, 2011. I think my friend here, he remembers, Mheshimiwa, you remember that I argued that don't control the nominal exchange rate because it's the automatic stabilizer. It's the nationwide relative price. So the moment we control that, then it means that the non-tradable prices will push misalignment. Even the IMF and the World Bank mentioned some years back that the exchange rate was misaligned. That's also what the governor of the central bank a few weeks back actually said. It's a statement of fact that that was true. So what has happened? It is the process of adjustment. Then the automatic stabilizer must move so that it equilibrates the whole thing. We are paying for past mistakes, and that is where we are. So, because we created a distortion, that distortion can only be corrected by movement of the relative price. And that means that we reprice so many things we suffer. We suffer because even the nominal debt is actually ballooned because of the pure effect. In fact, our computation with some of the people who are showing me some data, they were showing that actually, even if you didn't borrow a cent, our external debt would have increased by 24%. Just imagine that sheer impact. Of course, we cannot now, we have to do a lot of work to disentangle what happened because of the US or the developed world tightening their monetary policy and rising interest rates, and what happens to the others. But we can even show some numbers. For example, the current supplementary one shows that the deficit has increased by almost 0.9%. 0.9%. This is purely interest rate cost on debt. And that's why we have moved from our target 4.2% of GDP to about...
That would be how much in absolute figures?
It's about 145 billion. 145 billion shillings, absolute figure.
That 0.9 or 9%?
0.9.
0.9.
0.9%.
0.9, an equivalent of 145 billion.
Yes.
On account of exchange
on
rate
account
fluctuation.
of just interest rate, the exchange rate movement and interest rate cost. You can imagine how much we are exposed. It is a policy choice that we made that we have to have a floating exchange rate, but it's also a policy choice that we make. We sustain that policy space. It's a policy that is good for everyone, but we have to make sure that we don't control it for our benefit, because in the short term, it may look nice, but in the long term, we have to pay the price.
They moved from 4.2 as a 5.2.
I still think that we should allow Prof.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to continue on the topic. He said we moved from...
We have moved from about it was about 4.4 to add 0.9. It's giving us like 5.4. We are still trying to see how much we can cut. That's why the supplementary, to make sure that we remain at 5.2% fiscal deficit. I know somebody talked about fiscal deficit, but even the example that was given by Biro Kero said we had moved to 9% in terms of deficit. Now, 9% accumulation of deficit, it means that you are working like there are no budget constraints. Abraham was talking about that. We used to model behavior, and the first thing is to say there is no Ponzi game. This in Kenya we talk about the pyramid. When we model government behavior, we start by saying there are budget constraints, no Ponzi games, because you cannot have unlimited borrowing. You have to have. But now, when we moved from about what did you say, Biro? From is it 4% to about 4.2% to about 9%, you can see that something has to give way. Anyway, I'll come back to that a little bit. Second, of course, when the real exchange rate is misaligned, it affects everything else. It affects the performance in terms of our manufacturing sector. It affects the performance of our trade sector, and you find us in current account deficit is rising. So then again, nominal exchange rate must depreciate to equilibrate the process. You find that FDI, that is foreign direct investment, is not coming into the market. In fact, I was looking at the data from 2021, 2022, it was 0. So this outcome, it implies that for the economy to return back to stability and it means that the nominal exchange rate has to adjust and it depreciates so fast. But I cannot call it a free fall. That is not a good, there is a policy. It cannot be a free fall. It is actually adjusting to the magnitude of misalignment. Fourth, we do know that we also have to tighten monetary policy because you are faced by supply side shocks. and you are faced by scarcity value, and you have to mimic also what is happening to the other world, like the US. In fact, when this tightening in the US began, you realize that most of the people are caught off guard, including even the European Central Bank. They did not react until the second tightening of the US. So by the time they were tightening, Europe was tightening, the dollar was already stronger than actually the euro. So essentially, they noticed their own problems in terms of domestic inflation much earlier. Finally, there is no way in our current policy of exchange rate that domestic prices will not mimic the exchange rate movements. It also tells us that in future we cannot make those mistakes. It also means that in future we can observe our competitiveness by making sure that we do not impose controls. In fact, wherever I went, I was asked, Kenya has imposed exchange controls. I said, no, we have no capital controls and we have no exchange controls. Look, we have been looking at the data, for example, the East African currencies and Kenyan currency. And we realized that all of a sudden, other currencies started depreciating against the Kenya shilling. Why? Because there was at one time, the Kenya shilling was overruled in terms of trading. In the East Africa, remember, it was the preferred currency at the cross-border, at the border places. But because we changed into the new designs, instead of having a seamless translation, we canceled all the MOUs with other central banks. It became a foreign currency. Nobody was trading with it. And because you cherry pick which notes should it be, nobody was sure. Traders are never sure. They never follow the newspapers. They follow instinct. So if you look at from that period, from 2018, 2019, all of a sudden, all the East African currencies are strengthening against the Kenya shilling. I am calling them policy mistakes, Your Excellencies, is because that is where we are. It's an institutional failure problem that we have to come and remember that let's reverse it. We should not heap blame on anyone, but there is an institutional failure problem. Let me go to more government measures to reduce cost of living. And the first thing is when the Kenya Kwanza government started, began the journey for bringing down the cost of living and improving livelihoods, while at the same time trying to foster sustainable, inclusive economic transformation through implementation of bottom-up economic transformation agenda, we had several issues to take up. One is to recognize that at the totality of the problems that we are facing, it's a development discourse, it's a development agenda. I heard Ibrahim saying that we should cut spending, but you cannot wake up and cut spending. Because if you needed to cut spending and to the limit where it also fits your budget, you have maybe to have the population in school, teaching or whatever, everywhere, because they are recurrent costs, and we cannot just trim them at a go. We have to understand the realities. And one of them is to make sure that we have some interventions that do not require massive resources. Interventions can create a multiplier effect. One of them was the Hustler Fund. I didn't understand what my friend Biro Kero said, and said it is 300%. I borrow the Hustler Fund to make sure that my credit scores are improved. I borrow and maybe after 3 weeks I pay back, and I observe how much the pro rata in terms of how much you pay back. So I can talk about it. I borrow, I see, and want to see how much people are borrowing. In fact, we get data of who is reading in terms of how many times. In fact, we have said the next phase is we want to visit those people everywhere in Kenya and see what kind of business they are doing. This is an intervention. The housing project is an intervention because we cannot revitalize or revive our manufacturing sector without very strategic and targeted interventions. Because where we are, we have come down so hard. And I really sympathize with the situation that 22 million of Kenyans are below the poverty line. The debate is not how it is measured. The debate that's the truth. Poverty has hit us. One of my previous works that I would have started with it is to show that strong growth will reduce poverty significantly. But once it is supplemented by targeted social interventions transfers, it is going to flatten inequality. But the whole issue is that everything that in that statement requires money, isn't it? It requires money. So let's not chase our shadows. The first thing to do, because we don't have enough money. For example, somebody talked about during the COVID, I provided a study where we did using data from phones. By the mere fact of shutdown plus targeted social transfers, we reduced our transmission rate of COVID by 9%. But you cannot continue the transfers the way we were continuing. So in a sense, everything that we want to do requires money. So that's why I'm saying strategic interventions are very, very important. Hasrafat was one of them. The housing, the affordable housing is another. There are so many that are in the pipeline. But let me special focus on how we are going to increase employment and even create a more equitable distribution of income and social security because of the availability of, for example, affordable goods, affordable houses. We are likely to increase employment in a big way, and that can create its own momentum. But at the end of the day, we are looking at our tax rate, or our taxes, not because they are tax rates. We are looking at, we cannot even afford to use the tax rates to actually finance what we really have. But what we have done with my team at the Treasury and the KRA is to ask, how can we increase the tax base? At the end of the day, it's the tax base. During the Africa Climate Summit, we actually said we need to go into natural resource accounting because there are resources that are not brought to our GDP, and we can actually, again, improve on that. When Hinga was talking, I was also trying to check even our economic survey to see when you're parading the GDP data, the first component is ownership of dwellings, isn't it? That is, so increasing affordable housing, we are actually increasing the base, the GDP. All these measures are what is required in the development discourse. Mr. Chairman and co-chairs, the government has taken a long-term sustainable approach of subsidizing production of goods instead of consumption to respond to rising cost of living. And through this, for example, the voucher, the provision of fertilizer through the voucher, e-voucher fertilizer subsidy, this is extremely important, and I can give you the numbers. About 6 million bags of 50 kg bags of subsidized fertilizer were provided, worth Kenya shillings 15 billion. And they were retailing at a cost of 3,500 per bag. And this is a major reduction from the Kenya shillings, from the retail price of 6,500 per bag. So it represented a subsidy of 3,000 per bag, 3,000 shillings per bag. The most important thing is that this fertilizer was provided to it was specific to the regions, and that is why it has delivered a bumper harvest. And that is what we are expecting. That's why we are all fighting to make sure that the post-harvest losses are minimized this time round. The second was the guaranteed duty waiver on importation of key food products such as white maize, rice, yellow maize, soybeans. And this was, again, to add, and there are a combination of so many assorted proteins, concentrate, feed additives, that was effective from 1st February and to 6th August 2023. And this was to allow us to bridge food stocks deficit, as well as lower and stabilize food prices, and even animal feeds that were also suffering quite devastatingly. So you can imagine that those are very, very important interventions. The second intervention, co-chairs, honorable members, was the macroeconomic stability by ensuring that inflation remains within its target range. And the policy range is very, very important for us because it means that it anchors inflation expectations, and adequate monetary policy interventions were made. Inflation, for example, Monetary Policy Committee gradually raised the policy rate, the CBR, the central bank rate, from 7.50% in May 2022 to 10.50% in June 2026. And it has been retained at 10.50% 6.5 in August. And consequently, we have seen inflation coming down from about 9% to about 6.7% in August, 6.8 in September. So it's flattening, and about 6.9 in October. So it is actually flattening around 6.9. And this is from a peak of 9.6% in October 2022. And you can see that this is very, very important. If the inflation remains below 7% and stabilizes that, at that point, it means that we are going to lower we are going to anchor expectations of higher inflation, and that is going to signal interest rates declining and stabilization of the exchange rate will be ensured, of the nominal exchange rate will be ensured. Mr. Chairman, co-chairs and honorable members, the interventions required to correct market failures, which occur due to abuse of market power, is very, very important. And information asymmetry and also negative market externalities is one of the things that we really need to look at. When Bill O'Carroll was speaking, I actually thought about institutions, and I thought institutional failure is a major problem. He also talked about corruption. I take those two things at the same time. Because everywhere you see everybody talking about institutional failure, everybody talking about poverty and corruption, is an institutional failure problem. But we fail to look at it. We have to go back and ask ourselves, which institutions have failed us? And how do we solve it? Institutions have two key components, or maybe functions that I believe, I attribute them two functions which are very, very important. And one of them is to define and uphold the legal framework, that is the rules of the game. And because I'm talking to majority of the lawyers here, they know exactly what the legal framework means. And the second thing is that they have to define appropriate incentives. In economics, we call them incentives, but in general, it's what we call the reward structure. A combination of rules of the game and appropriate incentives will encourage prudent behavior in the marketplace. Let's face it. When institutions fail, we suffer. When you talk about corruption, I always like dividing corruption into two components. And that is where we really need to zero in. One of them is, I used to joke about it one time. I remember the late Honorable Saitoti presented his book and talked about corruption. I actually argued that there are two forms of corruption. One of them is this bribery you see around in government offices, in traffic police and all that bribery. That is greasing efficiency. It's because we have allowed the reward structure in public service to go so low that somehow some people look at you and say, if you don't grease efficiency, I cannot be efficient. But the second one, which is more subtle, is that it is state capture. And we have to deal with it through the legal mechanism. But if you don't deal with them, they reinforce each other. Anyway, I'm not saying that we should continue with the greasing efficiency. No. I'm just saying
I was going to really get shocked coming from you.
No.
I thought you actually meant greasing inefficiency, but it's greasing efficiency. But please continue. We'll ask our
yes,
question.
like you, Your Excellency. It is greasing efficiency, but it can be eradicated by increasing incentives. That's why I brought the issue of incentives. If the pay package is consistent with your effort, then obviously you don't need any efficiency. But the most important thing is that because of institutional failure, they reinforce each other. And that is what we really need to fight. So in a sense, we want to make sure that we create interventions. For us to move out of this, we have to create interventions. I started with the Hasra Fund. It's an intervention. G2G is an intervention. Affordable housing is an intervention. The whole issue is that you start it off, and then when it is working, you release it to the market. But for it to work, the market must be nurtured. I have three, maybe call them 4 stages in terms of making sure that we have strong markets. First, you have to develop the markets. And even where they have been devoured by so many other institutional failure problems, we have to make sure that we work very hard to develop those markets. The second one is that we have to nudge that market to the optimal path. It is not easy, it just don't happen. The third one is that we have to protect the market, because markets will not function unless they are protected. That's why we have regulations. That's why the market, the institutions that protect the market are very, very critical. And finally, we have to regulate the market. Regulating the market is reminding them that there are rules of the game. And that is what we are going to do when we make these interventions. Then we move to the next level. Interventions are creating the market. And then we move forward to solve the market failure problems. Let me give you an example. Why the Hasrafad was very, very important. I worked very hard with some of you. Thank you very much. Working in Parliament was very good, because I convinced you that we need to have CRBs, Credit Reference Bureaus. Initially, we started sharing negative information. But I came to the relevant committees and argued that we also need to share positive information for objectivity. And they did agree. Then CRBs were created. And it was good that they have a one-stop where you can get information for everybody who is participating in the market, financial market. But then our revolution in terms of digital finance came in. And digital lenders started creating credit scores. It was very, very important, because it becomes an endogenous variable that you want to protect yourself. You want someone to look at your credit scores, and you can be evaluated on your credit scores, so we can escape the collateral technology that has inhibited the growth of the markets for many years. But over time, you can agree with me that CRBs were not talking to those holding the credit scores. They were not talking to each other. CRBs became a binary tool. You are either in or out. That is, you are blacklisted, isn't it? You are blacklisted, you are out. But so it means your credit scores didn't matter. You be conscious about your credit scores worsening. So you can see this is an institutional failure problem. I once wrote about it, but I will not go into it. But I argued that our digital financial system will succeed if there is no institutional failure problem. In fact, I called it state capacity must improve. So we have done so many, and I even wanted, because that's why I wanted to show you why the Hasrafad was important. I've done so many things, but let me come to the energy. And of course, the diversification and what the CS has said is part of the game in terms of LPG. For me, that is very, very important. And again, the drought concerns. In fact, one of the things I wanted to add to the point that the CS Energy has raised is that we now have a technological breakthrough. We can actually store renewable energy. The green hydrogen is a very easier way to move, and that is what we are even moving. The world is moving into that, even the solar. And because we have a technological breakthrough, it means that we have to continue investing in this space so that we can improve on all the issues, all the storage of renewable energy, and we can solve our energy constraints, as we put it. By the way, it also means that our manufacturing sector, the secular decline in our manufacturing sector, has a bearing in terms of cost of energy. In the early 1990s, we were doing a survey every year to the farms, and most of those farms actually closed down. And most of the time, when we started that survey, they were talking about interest rate structure